Revelation 11 completes a story which begins with Revelation 6 and perhaps includes chapters 4 and 5. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, "Go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshippers, but exclude the outer court, do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. The author is told to measure the temple in Jerusalem. We'll find out toward the end of the book that the temple in heaven is also measured. One thing that I find very curious here is the mentioning of the Gentiles. I have tried to get a grasp of exactly what the author's views are. There seem to be multiple authors, and the mentioning of the Gentiles seems to indicate a strictly Jewish author. And I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. The 2 witnesses are probably an allusion to John of Gischala and Simon Bar-Giora, 2 major leaders of the Zealots in Jerusalem. However, this is also a reference to an Old Testament book, Zechariah. Also notice 1260 days. This is approximately 42 lunar months or 3.5 lunar years. The difference between a lunar time frame and a solar time frame is about 17 or 18 days. From the time of Vespasian's entrance to the destruction of Jerusalem is about 42 months on either calendar. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. This author seems to be attributing some Old Testament powers to these people. However, I did want to mention the fire that comes from their mouths. Early Christianity, and particularly any book attributed to John, has a theme of the Word. The Word, or Logos, was a philosophical concept that is spoken of by Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenized Jew. Essentially, the idea is that the Logos, or Word, governs reality, and particularly God's Word. While it is uncertain and perhaps unlikely that all of these books attributed to John are from the same person, there seems to be a theme in some of these books of the Logos being God. Fire isn't coming out of these people's mouths, words are, but the author thinks very highly of words. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying, and they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. In regards to blood and plague, this is a reoccurring theme, but during the 42 months in which the Romans are running around Palestine laying siege and slaughtering zealots, pestilence, plague, and blood would have been a common theme, and though rain wouldn't be stopped, water in many of these cities would quickly become scarce. Their prophecies may be causing these events, but only in the sense that they're leading a revolt against Rome, and Rome is making life hell on Palestine. Now, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. The siege of Jerusalem itself lasted about 6 months, and the city was taken in stages. The final battle for Jerusalem was within the last month. By this time, the entire city had been taken, except for the upper city. Notice we're definitely talking about Jerusalem here. For 3.5 days, some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these 2 prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. The author seems to be making legends out of these 2 people, and also making Christians out of them. The truth would not have been so pleasant. John of Gischala was captured and imprisoned the rest of his life in Rome. Simon Bar-Giora was captured, then paraded through Rome as a conquered king, and then executed. The author may not know their eventual fate, or he could be just giving them Old Testament attributes. Still, there was nothing pleasant about events in Jerusalem at this time. At that very hour, there was a severe earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe has passed. The third woe is coming soon. This is the final part of the battle. The 10th of the city the author speaks of is probably the upper city. The rest of the city had been captured in the previous 5 months. At this point, the battle for Jerusalem is essentially over. The rest of this chapter, verses 15 through 19, are the 7th trumpet. These verses usher in the opening of the temple of heaven. The earthly temple, the temple of Jerusalem, and the city of Jerusalem are destroyed. The only place left to look for a temple is in heaven. This entire chapter is a vague, dogmatic representation of the First Jewish-Roman War and the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem. The Temple of Jerusalem is replaced with a heavenly temple. The Second Temple era of Jewish history ends, and the Rabbinical era begins. In Christian terms, the beginning of the Rabbinical era is also the beginning of the Christian era. The surviving Jews of Palestine are dispersed. Their homeland is destroyed. A bunch of people are dead. Cities are gone, including the most important city of all, Jerusalem. These events would leave a scar on the Jewish world and would also mark an important event for the Judeo-Christian world.